Hello, Dave Moore with PITC, and today we're going to be reviewing the testing procedure for a DCVA. The DCVA that we're going to be testing is a ZURN Wilkins 350. The first thing we do before we test our device is we flush and clear any grit and debris from our test cocks. Once we've flushed our test cocks, we take our high hose and we connect it to test cock number 2. The first test that we perform on a DCVA is testing our check 1 in forward pressure. We have a minimum spring tension of 1 psi on our check 1 on our DCVA, so our gauge must settle above 1 psi and stay consistent for 2 minutes. So open test cock number 2 to pressurize our gauge. We'll bleed our gauge. Once we've bled and pressurized our gauge, I'm going to shut off isolation valve 1, and then we open up test cock number 3. Wait for water to stop running out of our test cock, and then observe our gauge. Right now our gauge is reading a pressure of 1.7 psi. If our pressure stayed constant at 1.7 psi, this would be recorded as a pass. Then I'm going to move on to the next test of our DCVA. The next test of our DCVA, we're going to take our high hose and take it to test cock number 3. We're going to re-establish pressure in our device, and then pressurize and bleed our gauge. Once we've bled our gauge, again we're going to shut off isolation valve 1 and open up test cock number 4. We're now testing forward tension on check valve number 2 that has a minimum spring tension of 1 psi. So again, we will need to stay and maintain above 1 psi for 2 minutes. While this is happening, we open up test cock number 2, and now we're testing check 1 in reverse pressure. Again, we must remain constant for 2 minutes. We're sitting at 1.4 psi. As long as we maintain that for 2 minutes, that would be recorded as a pass. The last test that we do on our DCVA, we take our high hose and move it to test cock number 4. I'm going to re-establish pressure in our device. I'm going to pressurize and bleed our gauge. And the last test and then shut off control valve 1. The last test that we do on a DCVA is checking our check 2 in reverse. So we'll open up test cock number 3, and then we'll reduce the pressure in our gauge to a more readable level. Again, we must maintain constant for 2 minutes. We'd observe our gauge for 2 minutes. If the needle did not move, that would be recorded as a pass. We would shut our test cocks, remove our high hose from the device, and return the device back to service.